Hello everyone, welcome back to From a Biblical Perspective with Sabriel Jemison. I am your host, Sabriel Jemison, and today I wanted to venture into politics and culture, poplitics if you will, as I discuss The Handmaid's Tale and abortion. As you may or may not know, the TV series The Handmaid's Tale, based on the book of the same title, has released its final season. In the wake of Trump's pro-life policies, women are once again equating America to the dystopian world of the series, and once again dressing up as handmaids to protest the murder of innocent children. Let's talk about it. The BBC and New York Times posted articles pertaining to these topics under the titles of Why the Handmaid's Tale is So Relevant Today and What the Handmaid's Tale Means in the Age of Trump. I like to focus on the article from the Washington Post, 5 Ways the Handmaid's Tale is Reality. This article was written during the last period of Trump's power, but people are saying all the same things today, and it simply proves that there are no new crazy ideas under the sun. Let's address each of these ways that the article lists and see what reality actually is. I would like to start with a little disclaimer first, if you will, that none of this is to say that sexism does not exist in America. I know that terrible harassment and sexism happens to women, and I've certainly been the subject of sexism, and actually, interestingly enough, I've experienced worse sexism and more shocking actions from lesbian women than men, so do with that but what you will. But anyway, that was my disclaimer, and nothing that I say should prove that otherwise. But let's address the first topics. Women and their bodies are objects of men. I was unaware that any of the things under this topic were happening in America. Oh, that's because they're not. The rise over women's bodies is referring to abortion in America, not forcing women to have sex. And it could actually be argued that it's the exact opposite of what they are enforcing. In The Handmaid's Tale, women are forced to marry, I guess you could say, and specifically sleep with men. In America, there are a lot of people that are against abortion that are also against premarital sex or for abstinence whenever possible, and they encourage that. So that's the exact opposite of what people are suggesting in The Handmaid's Tale. And other parts of the world is key in this section of the article that the Post puts out. They're talking about how other parts of the world are much more closer to the Handmaid's Tale. That is true. Women in Saudi Arabia just gained the right to drive cars, and they can't even show their legs without being thrown in jail, while women in the United States are crying because they can't rip apart their babies. I don't see the equal treatment here. We should be so thankful, especially the people who think that abortion is okay and they think that it's unjust to end abortion. They should be grateful that that's the only thing they have to fight for on their end. The next point is that Islamophobia frightened the masses into relinquishing personal control and giving up the resistance. This happened in The Handmaid's Tale story, but just because someone or something is racist does not mean that it is sexist. It's still wrong, but equating Islamophobia to sexism or to abortion even that's not even plausible. That just doesn't make sense. And even then, Trump has never been racist or xenophobic in doing these pro-life things. And him wanting to build a wall was not xenophobic. That is the thing that people target him on most when they're talking about immigration. They want to bring up the wall. Oh, he wants to build a wall. He doesn't want anybody to come in. Well, yeah, what do you lock your doors for? At night, or hopefully during the day. Hopefully all the times. But if you lock your doors, you're doing the same thing that Trump and a lot of the Republicans want to do with this nation. You want security. You want to know that you're protected. It doesn't mean that you hate your neighbors or that you think they're evil people. It's just something that you do because you want to be safe rather than sorry. And it is not xenophobic to want a structured and non-criminal full country. We should do what we can, even though there are going to be criminals that are Americans. They were born here, and there's a ton of criminals in our system that are Americans. They're not immigrants. but we're going to do what we can to stop that, even if it doesn't mean that we're completely preventing criminal activity. The next one is point number 3. Christian religious fundamentalism runs rampant, with Bible passages being used selectively and incompletely. I appreciate the second part of this point, that they are saying that Bible passages are being used selectively and incompletely, meaning that they know that the Bible isn't actually saying the things that the leaders of the Handmaid's Tale world are saying that they say. But we need to know the difference between meekness and weakness. Okay, this is something that I really wanted to talk about in a lot of other situations as well, especially in the topic of submission or your role as a woman in the church or in your family, as a daughter, as a wife, things like that. But this can be said in this context as well, when a lot of people want to say that, oh, the Bible wants women to be weak. The Bible wants women to not have any control over things and have no power over their own autonomy and all these things. No, the Bible never says anything about that. Meekness is not the same thing as weakness, and all people are instructed to be meek in the Bible. There are a lot of passages that talk about meekness. It is simply humility and gentleness. It is not weakness. It doesn't mean that you are stomped all over and you can never say no to anything. And there's a lot of things that people like to reference from the Old Testament, especially when they are trying to say that the Bible is cruel to women. And this article is no different. Stoning is an old law thing, and that was made invalid by the new law that came with Jesus. And even saying that, you can say that and still say that God was right to have that law, okay? He never changes. He can change his mind, and that is made clear to us through when he changes his mind when people pray to him. And he can change his mind about the law from the Old Testament to the New Testament if he wanted to, and he did. But that was mostly because of what Jesus did. He was the one who opened up the door for us to have a lot more freedom, because he is the one who could take away our sins instead of sacrifices that we had to make ourselves. Physical, animal sacrifices. We should still be sacrificing worldly pleasures, but it's not the same thing anymore. And divorce is another thing that they talk about. It is sinful when it is not done for reasons of infidelity, or, of course, if your spouse passes away, you can then remarry, and that would be still pleasing to God. But you can think about this even from a worldly perspective. Divorce really separates and just demolishes families. It's terrible to see what that does, and you could argue that it's worse for parents to stay together when they're fighting and they hate each other, and that could be true, but divorce and remarrying is just something that creates even more turmoil within the family, and it complicates things, and it creates a lot of room for issues to come in. And God thought about that. He thought about that when he was deciding certain things were sins or not. We have to think about that too. There was a point that God sat down, if you will, and said, what am I going to say is sinful, and what am I going to say is not? And he always wants what's best for us, so he knows that the sins that he doesn't want us to do are going to be terrible for our lives. And when you sit and think about why he says certain things are sins, that really helps you stay away from those things. That is something that I've noticed when I am being really strongly tempted under a certain sin. I can think about why God hates this, and it really becomes clear to me in that way. And if you can't see it yourself, ask him, why should I not be doing this? Show me the damage that it's doing to my life. And the next one, this one is just laughable, I'm sorry. Number 4, people of color are summarily disposed of. Where is this happening? Where is this happening? They just like to bounce around, they just want to say all these things are happening. They start with probably the most reliable one that someone can say, yeah, okay, maybe, and then as they go along, the more and more The longer that they go along in this article, the more it gets just even more unbelievable. But anyway, people of color are similarly disposed of. This is not happening. I would like you to point me to a place in America where they are going around in that state, if you will, and there's police coming, and they're knocking on people's doors. Oh, are you a person of color? Okay, come here. Come with us. You're going to have to go to jail, and you're going to have to be executed. Show me where that's happening. It's not. And then the next point that it talks about in this number 4 point is that police are not being punished. What do you call all the riots and the encouragement to defund the police? That was happening a number of years ago, but it was real, and it was so hard to watch, especially as I was a pretty young kid at that point, and there's a lot of things that were going on that I didn't fully realize at the time, and now looking back, I really realized how terrible it was. And people will still say that the police aren't getting what they should get. They're not getting what's coming to them, and they're so horrible, and we need to defund the police and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting there thinking, do you not remember what happened years ago when we tried to do that, when people tried to do that? It was utter chaos. And yes, police that are doing things that are against the law should definitely be punished, but not every police officer is doing that. And that is very clear. Number 5, last one, is that women are blamed for their sexual assault. This is not true on a wide scale at all. Are we just going to ignore the Me Too movement that happened a number of years ago? And a lot of people are still clinging to that. And there's cases that go on all the time that are false cases that women are reporting. Women are capable of lying. I think people like to forget that sometimes when they're thinking about these cases. And sexual assault is never a victim's fault, ever. And that is especially offensive when you think about the amount of people that actually really do go through sexual assault. And there's people that are saying that they went through that and they didn't. It's absolutely so insulting and so offensive and degrading. And women are capable of lying about what happened to them. Let's look at this. The NSVRC reports that between only 2 and 10% of sexual assault reports are found to be false. So, if women are being blamed for their sexual assault, more cases would be found to be false because the system would be rigged. That's not what's happening. If that were true, more cases would be presented as false under the NSVRC, and the system would actually be rigged. But I would like to talk just for a little bit about the real Handmaid's Tale that is happening under everyone's noses as people encourage members of either political party to support it, and that is surrogacy. There is a YouTube video that I wanted to show to explain this point, and we will get back to that soon, but I want to show you some tweets from 2024. These were happening in the wake of the political campaigning that was going on, and the first one is from someone named Chris Evans on Twitter, now known as X. In the first episode of The Handmaid's Tale, the government suspended the Constitution and then cut off all women from being able to access their bank accounts immediately. I remember watching it and thinking, this is ridiculous. It can never happen here. Now, I'm not so sure. Really, Chris? You're not so sure? Show me where that's happening, either. Because it's not. The government suspended the Constitution. Our government is very pro-Constitution, and Republicans traditionally have been pro-Constitution for a long time, not since the very beginning of America, but there were many people that were pro-Constitution at the beginning of America, obviously, because we have one now. But Republicans are usually more pro-America and pro-Americans' values through history than liberals are, and the Constitution is one of those things. cutting off all access to bank accounts immediately. No, it's not even happening immediately. It's not going to happen at all. But it didn't even happen immediately. People are fear-mongering. It's just so deplorable. Okay, Plow on the same X said, "No, this is not a scene from the Handmaid's Tale series." NFL kicker Harrison Butker for the Kansas City Chiefs told the female graduates at the audience of the best job for them is homemaker. You're right, actually. It's not a scene from the Handmaid's Tale series. I'm 99% sure this person is being sarcastic, but they're actually right, and they just don't know it. Everybody likes to leave out the fact that this graduation was a Catholic school graduation. People in this crowd reflected his values, and even if they didn't, they'd been exposed to these values their whole entire lives through their schooling, and it's not like they're suddenly just aghast that he would say something like that in their presence. And being a homemaker has nothing to do with the Handmaid's Tale. People equate things that have no equality whatsoever when they're talking about things like this. Being a homemaker is definitely not the same thing as being a handmaid. And I wish people would see the beauty of homemaking a lot more than they do now. And I do see a lot of liberal people who are being more open to the idea of what homemaking is, and that's a good thing, even if they think that the traditional woman is oppressed. They're thinking about homemaking in a more positive light. Sometimes. I see that sometimes. But not nearly enough as I would like. But this YouTube video is from Allie Beth Stuckey, who is a political commentator who I followed for a long time. I don't agree with everything that she says, but there's a lot of good things that she has to say and her guests have to say, and I wanted to point out this little clip for you as I wanted to talk about how surrogacy is much closer to the Handmaid's Tale than abortion is. And when you really think about it, abortion is kind of the opposite of what the goal of the Handmaid's Tale is. They're forcing people to have children, while abortion is forcing people not to have children. So I don't know who first came up with this idea that it was the same thing. But anyway, let's roll this clip.
Okay, something that is really happening in the United States right now is a widespread billion-dollar surrogacy industry that thrives in the United States, which is the wild west of reproductive technology when it comes to the creation and the cryopreservation of embryos, the farming of eggs, the procurement of sperm to make these little people, sometimes dozens of little people for two people or one individual who simply wants to create children. These embryos are graded, they are discarded, they are frozen indefinitely, they are thawed, they are given to people and never followed up on. That's what happens in the United States through IVF, through sperm and egg selling. And one of the most disturbing aspects of the reproductive industry in the United States is surrogacy. Surrogacy, typically, it's a little bit different than what happens in Gilead in the United States. Commercial surrogacy requires an egg seller that is separate from the gestator. So you've got the egg seller, which is the biological mother. In some cases, you've also got a sperm seller. In some cases, you've just got the sperm seller and you don't have the egg seller as well. But when we're talking about a surrogate, it is typically the creation of a child using the DNA of two individuals, which are complete strangers, creating these embryos and then transferring these embryos into a surrogate who is not the biological mother, is not related to the child at all. And this carrier, this surrogate, carries the child until birth. Very often these are premature births because they are high risk pregnancies. They were not naturally conceived. This baby doesn't share DNA with the carrier. That's not how it's supposed to be. It can be very dangerous for both baby and mother. And the baby is born and then taken away from the mother and then given to the intended parents. Very often nowadays, the intended parents are two men, because two men can't make a baby on their own. They can't carry a baby. And so they need to purchase the services and the DNA of two other women to carry that baby. And to prevent bonding with the surrogate, because the bond there, even if the surrogate is not the biological mother, the bond there is so strong that it has to be severed at birth, or else the gestator might get this crazy idea that she has some claim over this child, because everything in her body, all of her hormones, her milk is coming in, everything in her brain is telling her, protect this child. This is your child. Hold this child. Cherish this child. Everything hormonally, physiologically in the baby is saying, where's my mom? Where's the smell and the touch and the feel and the heartbeat of the woman who has been carrying me for the 9 months? The past 9 months, this is the only home that I've ever known. We know that it is physically, health-wise necessary for that baby and that mom to be bonded. And when I say mom, when I'm talking about surrogacy, I'm talking about the gestator. But when we're talking about in typical situations, that mom and that baby are supposed to have that bond seconds after birth. We are told that over and over again during pregnancy. The skin to skin is so important. Why? Because it regulates the baby's body temperature, it regulates the baby's breathing and the baby's heartbeat. They've just gone through something really big, really dramatic, really traumatic, and they need that bond. But in surrogacy situations, that skin to skin opportunity is taken away. That bonding experience necessary for the health of the child is taken away to prevent that bond, and the child is given to the intended parents. Sometimes a mom and a dad, a lot of times two men, and sometimes an individual man. That is what is happening on a daily basis in the United States because we have virtually no regulations around it. Let me show you a video of what that actually looks like. This is a news story that was reposted by journalist Genevieve Gluck on X. 3.
As a divorced single mom, she needs the money to buy a home for herself and her 2 children. Jana and the baby are separated immediately. Surrogates aren't allowed to touch the child they've just given birth to.
I hope that breaks your heart. When you hear that baby's cry.
Beautifully stated and so well thought out on Allie's part on that. And that's something that I had not thought about before seeing this episode. This was in her channel and podcast, Relatable, episode 1161, and she included a song there that really illustrates just the sadness of that situation. And my heart goes out to people that cannot have children. It's a terrible thing, and it's so hard to go through. But placing the wants of an adult over the wants and needs of a child is not what anyone should ever be called to do. Ever. We as a society are expected to protect the most vulnerable. And among that is women and children, but most of all, children. And we cannot place the wants of adults over the needs and the well-being of children, no matter the case. And that is really hard. That's really, really hard. But it's true that this is a sad thing that is happening. And it is so much more similar to The Handmaid's Tale than abortion is. And I could go on about this topic for forever, but please let me know if you would like to hear more about this. And I know that I will be talking more about abortion in the future. And I hope that this was an educating episode for you, even if it was not can look at these things and examine them with your own wisdom in your own mind and really think about and reflect on these things. And I'm so thankful that you came here and that you listened, and thank you so much for listening, and please have a blessed day.